Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the webinar channel of the Association of Certified eDiscovery Specialists. My name is Mike Quadraro. I am the president of ACEDS. Today, we're joined by our partner, eDiscovery Today, Doug Austin, the prolific writer, blogger, for a webinar that is entitled Beyond Purview, Extending the Legal Hold Capabilities of Microsoft Purview. We'll get into the presentation in a moment. If you are not already, please subscribe to eDiscovery Today, Doug's blog at eDiscoverytoday.com. And before we get started, please know we love questions. We're happy to take questions. Please submit your questions using either the chat or the Q&A button. In the Q&A button, you have the option to submit your question anonymously. If you'd like a copy of today's slide deck, it should be available in the resource button located on your screen. Alrighty, without further delay, I'm super excited to introduce Doug Austin, who will take the presentation from here. Doug, please take it away.
Thanks, Mike, and hi, everybody. Welcome to the ACEDS webinar on Beyond Purview, Extending the Legal Hold Capabilities of Microsoft Purview. Over the next hour, we'll discuss potential legal hold challenges that you might experience with Microsoft Purview and how to extend the capabilities of Purview to address those challenges. As Mike mentioned, we do welcome questions, and you can submit those via the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen, and a copy of the slides is available as well via the resources tab at the bottom of the screen. Here's what we'll be talking about today. We'll begin by discussing the limitations of legal hold management in Microsoft Purview E3, including the importance of an important milestone set to occur in just a couple of weeks. We'll then get into the compliance risks associated with an unmanaged legal hold process and what they could mean to your organization. We'll compare the best-of-breed solutions approach to an end-to-end approach and discuss the advantages of the best-of-breed approach. Then we'll discuss some real-world examples where organizations needed defensibility and scalability in their legal hold process and the consequences of their legal hold failures. And finally, we'll discuss leveraging a solution that supplements E3 hold capabilities and addresses its gaps. And as I mentioned, we'll look to save time for questions at the end, but we'll address them along the way if we can. Of course, any ideas expressed by us here are our own, not those of our organizations, clients, or partners. The legal hold for disclaimers never expires. And we have a terrific panel here today to discuss these topics, so let me introduce them. Daniel Maiworm is the Product Director, Data Management and Expiration with Cloudficient. He's a seasoned product development leader with a wealth of hands-on experience across regulated industries, including pharma, legal, finance, and insurance. For the last 4 years, Daniel has been instrumental in shaping Cloudficient's product strategy around data management and eDiscovery. With 25 years in the industry, he's not just an expert on regulatory frameworks, but also on their real-world implementation challenges. As a speaker and presenter, he's therefore known for his customer-centric approach to eDiscovery, transforming complex ideas into actionable insights. Welcome, Daniel.
Hey, thank you all.
Brandon D'Agostino is Vice President of Product at Cloudficient, where he leads the development and execution of the company's product strategy. Brandon has over 15 years of experience in the legal technology industry in a variety of client-focused and executive leadership roles. He also teaches eDiscovery as an adjunct professor at the Charleston School of Law and is the co-author of Foundational eDiscovery, a practical guide to early case management. Brandon is a member of the South Carolina Bar Association and holds additional certifications in eDiscovery and cloud computing. Hello, Brandon.
Hi, Doug.
Angie Nolet is Senior Corporate Counsel of Litigation and eDiscovery at a national publicly traded technology company. Before going in-house, Angie was a trial lawyer at the law firm Lane Powell, which is now Ballard Spahr, where she specialized in commercial litigation of design-build disputes. Before that, she was a deputy prosecuting attorney at the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office in Seattle, Washington. Angie received both her JD and bachelor's degree from the University of Washington. She also holds a ACEDS certification from ACEDS, was a finalist for the Financial Times Innovative Lawyer North America Award for Outside Counsel Management in 2023, and was named one of Best Lawyers Ones to Watch in 2020. And she co-hosts the terrific podcast eDiscovery Chicks about all things eDiscovery and legal tech. Hi, Angie.
Hi, Doug.
And I'm Doug Austin, who will be your Purview and Legal Hold point guard for this webinar. I'm the editor of eDiscovery Today, which is a daily blog about eDiscovery, cybersecurity, data privacy, information governance, and AI trends, best practices, and case law. I've been providing consulting and project management services in the legal space for over 30 years, so I know a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two. And I've been daily blogging for nearly 15 years, so I'm either committed or I ought to be. So let's start our discussion today with a news flash. In case you haven't already heard, the classic eDiscovery standard and premium experiences for M365 and Purview are being retired on August 1st, just over a couple of weeks from now. In fact, the transition's already underway. That retirement includes important classic eDiscovery tools like content search, standard eDiscovery, and premium eDiscovery, and their functionalities are being merged into the new eDiscovery experience within the Microsoft Purview portal. The new experience will feature a unified interface for eDiscovery Standard and eDiscovery Premium cases, enhanced reporting options, and browser-based exports, and that's potentially a good thing. But it's also going to include terminology changes, deprecated functionality, and structural changes for how core components of the eDiscovery workflow are organized, which will undoubtedly create some challenges for legal teams out there. So Angie, software updates are a way of life for corporate legal departments, and I'm sure you've dealt with several over the course of your career. So what advice do you have for our audience to minimize the disruption and maximize the benefits of the new capabilities that a software update provides?
Well, you are quite right that those are a part of being in a corporate legal department. And so as far as minimizing disruption, I've got three pieces of advice. First, whatever the software update is, map it to a real life workflow. So start by identifying where that update intersects with how the legal team actually works, what templates are going to change, what processes will be impacted, and then work backwards from those friction points. Second piece of advice, communicate what's better and not just what's new. Updates get traction when users understand how it's going to make their life easier. Fewer clicks, less manual entry, smoother integration. So spell that out for people. And then finally, involve end users early. Loop in a few power users or skeptics before the rollout, because they'll catch potential hiccups and they'll be more likely to champion the change later. Now, as far as maximizing the benefits of software updates, I've got two pieces of advice for that. First, use the update as an opportunity to retire some bad habits. Every update will naturally is a forcing mechanism. And so use it to sunset those old processes that aren't really working or are a little bit clunky. Sunset old templates or workarounds that really don't serve you anymore. Second piece of advice, surface wins to build momentum. Highlight early wins. Did the dashboard cut reporting time in half? Did you get a cleaner intake process? Share it with people. I can't tell you how excited legal teams get when you share those wins, and then people start sort of naturally adopting them. And then all of a sudden you've got a host of grassroots champions for that update.
Yeah, those are all great pieces of advice. Thanks, Angie. So Brandon, there's been a steady migration to the cloud over the last several years, and M365 is just one of the enterprise solutions that's exploded in popularity. So what are some of the benefits that you've seen organizations achieve through the move to the cloud?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, software updates aside, I think that's, that is actually one of the benefits is that while we're talking about this update, happening for users and there are some workflow changes that need to happen, no one in the data center has to do anything, right? Typically, these updates happen, they're rolled out to a wide audience. And so I think there's some infrastructure side of things that obviously there are benefits to cloud computing that we all generally know. I think from an eDiscovery standpoint, though, I mean, we can remember the days of, showing up at a client with an email server on life support or an email server plus two different archives, and they all export in different formats. And we're all trying to figure out, using, 15-year-old processing tools, how we're going to get all of that into review on time and on budget. So I think there's some benefit in the uniformity of having a single export experience for the majority of your enterprise data. Now, that does tend to maybe translate into a slight challenge, is what we're seeing in the ease of SaaS adoption, and we'll talk about this a little bit later as well, with regard to legal hold specifically. But you see organizations the ease of adopting cloud computing tends to then encourage different departments to use best of breed apps for their own work, right? So you're thinking, the marketing department has tools that they're using that are outside of the Microsoft ecosystem, or, accounting has its own tools, and engineering has a series of tools that they're using. And so it is a little bit, while we have the uniformity within each of those tools, those can become silos if we're not careful, and we don't have process built around it to, to make sure that we're able to apply preservation, collection, and all the other duties that we have in litigation to all those different data sources.
Yeah, makes sense. Question, can you provide link to Microsoft providing official date of cutoff for Classic eDiscovery, specifically the 1st of August? I was thinking it would be the end of the month. It's my understanding, and the link there is the bottom to the resource. It's my understanding it's August 1st. I don't know if anybody else knows anything different, but that was my understanding. But certainly what information is available there should be available via the link at the bottom of the slide. So Daniel, Brandon talked about the benefits. Conversely, there's been some challenges associated with the move to the cloud. So what are some of the challenges that you've seen organizations faced with through the move to cloud-based solutions like M365, Purview, and other platforms?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is to get to the cloud. I guess most people here on the call will already be M365 users if they are interested in a Purview call. So you have been going through a migration. But what we're seeing is, again, like mergers, acquisitions might be triggers for going from one cloud to another, from one tenant to another. That's a big thing, like physically keeping control of your data, because you only have as much control over the data as the vendor allows you to. So there is always a component of lock-in. And the lock-in is, first of all, is because you don't really have the physical copy anymore in your data center like you used to have very often in the old days. But then also there's just no control to get to the data that you need if you don't get the right APIs. One example for me is Microsoft Copilot. So if your employees start chatting with the AI, the only way to ever discover this is through Purview. So you cannot even find a different tool that can get the access to this data. And so there is, to me, the biggest challenge right now to keep up with the changes, to always have a little bit of an idea about the data sovereignty and the data autonomy that your company requires. Sometimes it's useful to have another copy spun off for your own use, maybe just store it in a big bucket, in a like another cloud bucket, so that you keep control over it. And in the end, we're all in this situation that Microsoft M365 is now a de facto standard, and we're all kind of nailed to that ship, which is a super tanker right now with lots and lots of users. And I think you will have a few words about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a great segue to the next slide, because yeah, I mean, it's making changes to a massive code base like M365 and Purview can be like trying to turn the Titanic, and we all know what happened there. M365 has at least 400 million individual paid seats globally, but it's also used by many more individuals through family and small business subscriptions. In fact, I think some estimates are that M365 has as many as 1 billion users using the product. And if you add to that the fact that Microsoft utilizes hundreds of thousands of servers across hundreds of data centers to power M365, and that there are literally trillions of emails stored by Microsoft, you've got a lot of challenges when trying to improve the platform to keep up with changing legal hold demands. So Daniel, during our prep call, you talked about these considerations for Microsoft. So how do you think they're impacting Microsoft's ability to support their customers' compliance and eDiscovery needs?
Well, I think what I told you during that call was that you have to appreciate what the Microsoft product managers are trying to achieve here. So they're doing an incredible job at a close to impossible problem. I've just did some math, and maybe that's enlightening for some folks, that if you have like 10 trillion messages, which is the number that I heard that is stored, or 10 trillion objects, if you were paying $1 per 1,000 messages, maybe for reindexing, changing something, you would still incur about $100 million. So that is kind of what they're operating with. So anything you want to do that consumes more RAM, that needs more storage, is difficult. So that's why we still look at some of the indexing issues. It's really something they can only change over time when they completely change the underlying platform. But another thing is that you have to think about Purview as a much bigger entity than just eDiscovery. I would say like 80% of that is compliance and security. And so it's already just a part of the product and the problem. So if we then talk specifically about legal hold, you can see that this is just another entry in a wish list for the customers, and they're trying hard to do some of the most requested things, but it's pretty far away from being a workflow engine and a process tool that legal people can just use and be happy with, all the functionality provided. Very often with Microsoft, it's about, getting what I would call the middle 50% right. They don't care about the very small users, but they also don't care about the very large enterprises, simply because they say, well, we cannot really cover the whole stretch of requirements between very low and extremely high. So they always leave room for third parties to cover these, like enterprise. That's one of the reasons why we're on this call, and why we give some insight where this cutover point is for us.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's get into some of the specific challenges associated with the Purview legal hold process. So Daniel and Brandon, could you walk us through these specific challenges associated with Microsoft Purview and how it handles the legal hold process?
Sure. So I think one of the critical things very early on when you create a new case, and then when you update your case, depending on what you receive from the opposing party, is to get the scoping right, to understand who are your custodians, what were the key events, and then finally find out where the data is that is related to these custodians. So I give you an example that Microsoft acknowledges this. There is a feature now where you can say, if you select a custodian, that you also want to include the direct reports. It's a great idea, but when we talk about larger organizations, you do not necessarily want the org chart from today and the org chart from Active Directory. You probably want to have a historic org chart, and you probably want to also see what the org chart looked 3 years ago. So these kinds of things right now are interesting, but they are like only for very basic use cases. So the next thing is the coverage. I said early on that getting the data into M365 is already a challenge. But if you're a user of other platforms like Slack, like a Box and third-party tools, you can try and import the data into M365, but then that's not just costly, but you might run into index issues again, because Microsoft doesn't understand a lot of third-party file formats. So very often you end up with another repository, or you need a tool that can deal with Purview and these third parties. And that's not what Microsoft is looking at. Another thing that we want to point out is that if you want to target data, for example, that is in a shared repository like SharePoint, you still run into the issues that have been plaguing the platform for some time, like, again, indexing issues with large files, with certain file formats that cannot be indexed with standard indexing. So you still all have these issues, and advanced indexing is only available like in the premium tier. So you very often find yourself in the situation that you can only collect the whole SharePoint or only collect the whole OneDrive and not say, I only want a certain targeted subset of it. And then something that I really think is an important part of the story is if you look at all the supporting processes like legal hold notifications, the acknowledgement, maybe you want to send a survey with the legal hold notice and say, did you own other devices? Do you have other repositories? Did you store stuff on a USB stick? All of that needs to be handled separately. So you end up, again, running your case in Excel and sending out emails separately from M365 and Purview. So I think that's a gap that Microsoft isn't even addressing at this stage, to have more of this. You can use Power BI for it, but that kind of ties in with the next point, which is you normally want to have a very consistent audit of everything you do. And here the Microsoft audits are very technical. They're not really useful for presenting this to a legal audience. So you end up changing the audit protocols, like just extracting what you need or putting them in Excel and deleting columns. That's all stuff that costs a lot of time and is what we, from what we hear, is also an error-prone process.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, and these are the types of things, like you said, why we're here today talking about this stuff, because there are gaps and challenges with the legal hold. Let's talk about another challenge related to legal hold management, and it's a topic we've talked about a lot over the past few years. The dreaded preservation nightmare of hyperlinked files. So I'm going to walk through a scenario to illustrate that. Let's say you have a custodian named Sarah Davis, which is actually the name of the custodian Microsoft uses in their add custodians to a case help documentation. She has email, which of course you want to preserve. And let's say she also has file in her Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive data locations. Microsoft says you can identify the custodians, choose the custodian data locations, and configure hold settings, and effectively issue a legal hold in place, which is supposed to be one of the benefits of cloud-based solutions. So we do that, and we put those data locations on hold for Sarah, and we're good to go, right? Well, here's the problem. When you do that, you're only putting the files that she sent via email on hold. You're not putting the files sent to her on hold. So here you have 16 other people sending links to files from their own data locations, and it's usually, of course, way more people that custodians communicate and collaborate with. So to effectively put all her files on hold, you would have to put each one of these data locations on hold, which begins to multiply the more custodians you have, and which becomes impractical as it would paralyze an organization's information governance program. And by the way, while we're picking on Purview on this slide with this example, this challenge is true of any enterprise solution where communications are being sent and in-place hold is being used to put custodians on hold. That's a similar challenge everywhere. So Angie, you and I discussed the hyperlink files challenge in eDiscovery Chicks podcast last year with your colleague Bree Murphy. So from a corporate legal perspective, what are the issues associated with hyperlink files that keep you and other corporate legal professionals up at night?
Yeah, I mean, as you've illustrated with this slide, they're hard to preserve and collect and identify. There's a lot of data sprawl that happens in our kind of cloud-based environment these days. And this just illustrates sort of the extent of the problem, where you start pulling a thread and suddenly, you're 20 custodians in. So that's my first one. They're hard to preserve and collect because it's not just about like the parent file or the one person anymore. Everything is so interconnected. And you need to preserve the linked context in the form that you need to preserve it in, on a specific date, the most recent version, etc. So that's both technically and logistically very complex to do. And along those lines, the context is pretty easy to lose because we've got all these different versions. There might be a lot of sharing that goes back and forth. And these kinds of collaboration tools, they just aren't really built for litigation. They might ease workflows and make things smarter and faster and more efficient on the day-to-day, but they're not built for litigation. And the litigation software is trying very rapidly to catch up to them. But this is sort of, a much more complex version of the email problem that happened when email began to proliferate, where the technology just doesn't quite match up with the way that people actually work. And so, I think there's this sort of nightmare of identification and preservation and review that happens where you're trying to capture everything without boiling the ocean. And that keeps me up at night from just a cost control perspective and a resourcing perspective.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the idea of eDiscovery by design with some of these platforms, you wish that they would take eDiscovery into consideration when designing these platforms, but it often seems to be an afterthought, which of course is, I guess you can look at it as job security for us. So there's that. Angie, also, given that there's maybe potential preservation challenges, even with a robust platform like M365, how should legal and eDiscovery professionals handle it to ensure they're meeting their preservation obligations?
Yeah, so I want to actually start my answer to this by framing the standard, which is not perfection, it's reasonableness. Courts expect us to take reasonable steps, but not superhuman ones. And so M365 Microsoft Purview is powerful, really powerful, but it's not foolproof. I mean, nothing is. And so understanding its limits and then building processes around them is how you stay defensible. So to that end, I would say get aligned on the capabilities of that software and its gaps. So start by mapping what the software can preserve automatically and what it can't. For example, links, chat edits, external files, things that might require some kind of special handling or pose as very specific hurdle. Then build operational procedures around those blind spots, because those gaps are where the risk creeps in. Along those lines, partner early with IT. Preservation is often a shared responsibility between your legal department, IT, information security, engineering, work across orgs to make sure that you're addressing all of those gaps and bring the people to the table who will help you identify those blind spots. Also, when you're communicating with other orgs, IT, engineering, etc., I find it really helpful personally to explain the why and not just the what, so that it doesn't feel like this kind of directive that's coming from legal. It feels much more like a shared responsibility, and everybody understands why they're doing what they're doing. And then, I want to really emphasize this proportionality concept, especially with this slide up right now, where you have just a massive number of people, and that number of people will grow and grow and grow if you're trying to meet a standard of perfection. But your preservation efforts also need to match the stakes of the litigation. So for a $10,000 dispute, it doesn't make sense to boil the ocean. For a bet the company case, it may. And so yes, you might not be able to preserve every comment on every team's chat, but if you've taken reasonable steps, gotten aligned with IT, documented your process, you're probably going to find yourself on fairly solid ground.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think most of the case law we've seen have re-emphasized that idea of reasonableness, not perfection, and a lot of them happen to begin with NRA. So those are the bigger kind of types, bet your company types of cases. So not surprising, those are the ones where a lot of these issues are being dealt with. So Brandon, in the 2025 State of the Industry report by eDiscovery Today, you said you thought parties should be required to preserve, collect, and review the original, sent, accessed, and current versions of a hyperlinked file for relevance. Could you talk about why you think that and where the technology stands in enabling them to do so?
Yeah, sure. And I think the technology to preserve is probably it's a little bit easier to do, even in a Microsoft environment. You may end up in a situation where you're preserving everything. And that's kind of why we'll talk about this maybe a little bit at the end, but, Cloudficient is kind of just thought about, ways that we can provide some more innovation, around that, so that you're not, you may need 3 versions of a document, and you're not, preserving, hundreds of versions of a document. And I think, even the idea of versions is a little bit nebulous when we talk about this stuff, because it's not in the sense that we think of. And if you're a transactional lawyer and you check in a document, or you check out a document, or you make changes, red lines to a contract, it's not that. It's every time the computer decides to arbitrarily save a copy of the document, which could mean that it was open in a browser tab for 48 hours on your computer over the weekend, and it saved 6 versions. And then Microsoft will only save a certain number of versions. I mean, Google's the same, right? There obviously has to be a limit, as we talked about with trillions and trillions of items. I think, though, that data is in your possession, custody, and control, right? I mean, if the versions have not been overwritten, which can happen, right, over a long period of time, if we're really looking back far in the past. And at some point, I feel like we've got to make some type of relevance, determination, and whether that be, at the message level, right? I often hear from clients that, we'll have, outside counsel will be in the middle of review, months into review, and come across a hyperlink in an email and go, "Oh, this looks like it would be really relevant. I need the file version at that specific time when this message was sent." And that manual effort will lead to discovering that document's no longer in existence, right? It's either the version's rolled off, that they can't go back that far, and so you get a current version, and you don't understand the context of what's changed. So there are definitely technical limitations. Now, I will say that we're making strides at Cloudficient to make that a reality, and there are ways to do it in those bet the company litigations that you could create systems and processes around it. But I would say that much more, to Angie's point about proportionality, we're seeing more compromises happening in cases where you say, okay, there's a level of effort here to get each one of these. You can get 50, you can't get 5,000, right? So, pick your 50 and pick them well, and we'll go get those. Or, in some cases, we've seen it change. The protocol has changed over, the course of several months. One last point I want to say is I'm really glad that somebody mentioned in the chat that, while in litigation, we can talk about proportionality in, government investigations and subpoenas, cases that begin with United States versus, we don't have the luxury of discussing proportionality. And so I think, all, corporate attorneys listening should take heed that, this is coming, right? Like, the ability to provide this data is coming, and it likely is going to be driven by investigations before litigation, where you really don't have an option. And it takes as long as it takes, right? And I think that was John's point in the chat, was that I'm not really concerned with the impact on the entity, because we're seeking justice. And I think there are times where we're gonna have to think about that, in terms of what technologies we're using and how we're handling preservation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could I just push back on that point really quick from the corporate perspective?
Sure.
Because we get government subpoenas and ACEDS and investigations all the time. And I actually do push back on those organizations as far as proportionality is concerned. And I will say, like, hey, that's going to impact our organization. Actually, let me back up. I usually start with asking a couple of questions. Do we have the information they're asking for? Can I get it? And if I can get it, how burdensome is that going to be? And then I've actually had wonderful relationships with government lawyers, explaining that to them and finding a middle ground where I'm not giving them, a scorched earth, here's everything our org has, but I'll give them something in the middle. And I found that actually really helps with those relationships, and it eases the burden on the company as well.
Okay, that's great to know, Angie, because certainly that's one of the things I've been more curious about, is how what the landscape is on the investigation side. And I know that certainly one of the challenges in talking about this topic is getting down the hyperlinked files rabbit hole, which we already spent, actually, Brandon and I spent a whole webinar on hyperlinked files back in March. So we certainly want to recognize it's a expansive topic. I will touch on one of the questions from the Q&A. Is there a preference for legal professionals for which version of the shared file they get, the version at the share date time or the version that exists at time of collection? And honestly, it may be oftentimes more which version can you get, because certainly one of the things that we've seen in the NRA Uber case is the idea of the contemporaneous version, which I think most people consider to be the version sent. But sometimes I think it could be the version when accessed by the receiving party, which could have been edited since it was sent. So I think there's some question there. And I definitely think the whole version question has become a big challenge. It's not only can I get the version of the file, can I get the file, but can I get the version of the file that's contemporaneous to the communication? And that's it. It's sometimes not even possible. So certainly challenges among there. We could spend more time here, but we should probably move on because we're already 10 minutes behind. So, so with that in mind, let's touch on compliance risks. So Daniel and Brandon, could you walk us through the challenges associated with M365 from a compliance standpoint quickly?
Yeah, I can take these. I think, just kind of, touching on it, I think we've touched on some of this already. There's, and this even, you can kind of relate back to things like the versioning, right? I think there's some options that have been introduced. I was talking to a client this week actually about some options that were introduced where they can select different, ranges of versions, I guess, to preserve in M365. And it could be the current version, it could be 10 back, it could be 100 back. But those are arbitrary, right? They have nothing to do with context of access or sent. And so why do I want 100 versions when I don't know which of those were the documents sitting open over the weekend, right? So it can lead to over collection. I think there's some things that Daniel mentioned where I think more and more we as an organization have to be very security conscious, obviously as stewards of other organizations' data and handling that data, just like Microsoft would be. I think we see way too many organizations in the news for data breaches, including law firms. And, a major eDiscovery service provider had a major data breach a couple years ago. And so I think we have to be conscious about data, even in the context of litigation, over collection leading to sending information out that then leaves our security perimeter, and I use perimeter loosely, but I think that's another argument for more targeted collection, maybe a little bit more reduction in volume if that can happen in-house. And then I think the non-Microsoft systems are just growing and growing and growing in popularity, and there's perfectly legitimate business reasons. You want to use the best of breed products if you're the CMO of an organization. I want my team using the best tools. It just creates challenges if you're kind of relying on one system to handle your preservation. You just need to have the workflows and the processes for those other systems, and to have a way to get to be interviewing custodians and sending out whether it's automated questionnaires if you have a large volume of custodians, or direct interviews, to make sure that the data that's outside those systems is being accounted for. And that can change case by case, as we all, most of us probably know. And then, getting to the selectiveness issue that I think Daniel was talking about earlier, where you have just various indexing challenges. I think that's why, even with these tools, many large organizations still use a processing vendor downstream and tend to over collect, because even within a system like Microsoft, the indexing capabilities, or not, shouldn't say capabilities, but limitations vary based on the target of the data. So You combine that with index differences in a Slack or a Box or a Google, environment. And I think you get into issues if you're trying to be too, if you're trying to rely on keywords, for example, to try to filter things before
Yeah,
having a unified index.
Yeah, that's definitely a great kind of summing up of several of the compliance risks and challenges. So, Angie, in your corporate legal experience, what are the compliance challenges that have kept you up at night, and what do you recommend to our audience on how to address those challenges?
Yeah, I think two things have kept me up at night. First is holds that are sent but not enforced. Now, of course, we have software that can handle this, but sending a legal hold notice isn't the same as enforcing a hold. And so if you don't have visibility into acknowledgements, compliance, or downstream actions, then you're basically just crossing your fingers. So that's one thing. The second thing that keeps me up at night is audit trails. Because what happens if your process is challenged in court? Can you show a defensible process, or are you cobbling together screenshots and email receipts? That lack of documentation is a real risk. And again, there's software that can handle that. As far as recommendations, my top one is just make it easy for people to do the right thing. Because by and large, custodians aren't trying to be difficult. They're just busy. They're just trying to do their jobs. So make the process clear and simple. Automate reminders, one-click acknowledgements, clear FAQs, reduce the friction wherever you can. Second recommendation, partner with IT and HR. People move, roles change, and if legal isn't looped in, data gets deleted or lost in offboarding. So you need tight connections with IT and HR, and probably to integrate with some of their workflows so that hold obligations carry through those personnel transitions.
All right, those are some great recommendations. Let's see, I can't remember. I guess I had didn't have a question on this one, or maybe it was after we were going through all of this. Brandon, did you have anything you wanted to add on this particular?
No, I mean, I think that I think Angie actually just covered it with her with her challenges. This was kind of the same, more about notifications that obviously written legal holds are still required, and I think that it's the tracking and enforcement that is an issue. And we've seen cases, which I think we'll probably discuss some in a bit, but there were a few cases last year, surprising number of cases last year that involved producing that legal hold audit trail, and went into a good bit of detail on that. And that scares us a little bit sometimes when we're thinking about, oh gosh, I have to actually turn this document over that I didn't probably spend enough time on, and wait, I probably should have followed up with those custodians, but I didn't. And those kind of things. I mean, having that audit trail, knowing that you can sleep soundly at night, knowing that you can push a button and export all of that data, and that you did all of the steps, and that workflow is being driven somehow in a tool or through a well-defined and audited process. I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's the key. And I think some of the challenges we've just talked about with regard to Purview may indicate that in a large organization with a heavy litigation profile, that system can't just be the end all be all for legal hold.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. All right, I'll try to keep up with the slides a little better and advance them when I'm supposed to. So quickly, let's talk about the difference between a best of breed approach to technology solutions versus an end-to-end approach. Hopefully, most of you are familiar with the Gartner hype cycle to track the cycle of adoption and acceptance of new technologies. There's an illustration of it there via Wikipedia. I also, because I just happened to, and it happened to be to the very day last year, I covered the 2024 Gartner hype cycle for AI. So I just covered the 2025 one. And so that also discusses more about these different phases, if you will, of the hype cycle, if you would. So Daniel, in your opinion, why does an end-to-end approach lead to disillusionment, even for a platform as robust as M365?
Well, I think the expectations start very high because people are used to M365 as end users. So they're excited about the features, Teams, SharePoint, Exchange Online. They get new stuff like Copilots. It's a really great deal for end users. So when someone in the company says, okay, we're just going to standardize on M365 and you get Purview, you have the same kind of expectations. And that's not true just for eDiscovery. There are like 3 to 10 people probably in most companies that are Purview users, mainly in IT. So people who look after compliance, communications compliance, data protection, records management, and eDiscovery, all with their own expectations. And when they get started, they believe Purview does it all for them. No need to worry about, 2, 3, 4 additional vendors that don't talk to each other, they don't integrate well. You think, okay, I get everything from one vendor, it'll make all sense. And then you suddenly realize that Microsoft does a pretty good job at the core things, but a lot of the convenience you got in the past from niche vendors is just no longer there. And these gaps, some are smaller, some are bigger, but they mean very often that you have to change your workflows. That a place where in the past you had some tool tracking stuff for you, you now have to manually enter into Excel. And so you enter like the valley of disillusionment when you figure out, well, why doesn't this work? Why is that so complicated? Why do my IT people don't understand if I tell them to do this or that? And they go into Purview, they do the wrong thing. And they do a lot of it. And then I have to take that and process and deduplicate and so on and so forth. And so a lot of the companies now are looking for better integrations, some with well-known tools and well-known vendors. Everyone seems to have like an idea how to cooperate and to complement Purview. And there are some players who also just say, look, if you are in the process of optimizing the Purview environment that you have, if you want to see the real value of what Purview provides, then you might need 1 or 2 additional vendors who help you stopping the Excel usage and kind of covering the gaps. And that is then what Gartner calls the plateau of productivity. That's when you have like set up the process again, that it works for you and that you kind of have finally most of the expectations that you originally have covered again.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a good segue to the plateau of productivity slide. So very quickly, Daniel or Brandon, can one of you walk through how a best-of-breed approach can help straighten out that hype cycle curve and reduce disillusionment?
Sure, I'm happy to take that. So I said already, Microsoft has this enormous super tanker of M365, and they always have to see what does it mean if we change 1 million servers. We can operate outside that world, so third parties in general can build purpose or build functionality for a certain purpose fairly quickly. I think we're also coming from a different angle because we're looking at the workflow kind of supplement the whole eDiscovery process in Purview. We talked about how do I create an audit protocol that's useful? How do I do notifications, surveys, interviews, all these things that might be more than just a notification. And we can provide that, plus the agility of working with a smaller entity. If you need something, we have very quick turnaround times. I know many other companies, same size, can also provide something in weeks versus months or quarters. In our niche, I always say we have so many conversations. We know so many larger organizations that try to achieve something that also the performance of the tool is top notch. And finally, I think that's an important one. I alluded to it earlier. Sometimes it's good to have another copy, like a company copy, a legal copy of the data, especially for systems that don't work well with Purview. And we can also provide that. And whatever we do, we have the approach that customers always own the key to the kingdom. So they don't have any fees, termination fees. They just change the password. So the the tool might not be able to go to the data pool, and the data pool is the customers. We don't charge $4,000 a terabyte to copy it on a hard drive, that kind of stuff. So all these things you normally get from smaller vendors and niche providers. And niche, I mean, not in a negative way, but you want something very specific. There are people out there who can deliver that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had a lot of great questions and comments. One thing I'll mention is several of them have kind of related to kind of capabilities, or how do I know if Microsoft is rolling out or sunsetting other platforms, or what changes they've made. So I'm going to share a great resource with you Greg Buckle's eDiscovery journal site. He tracks the Microsoft roadmap items monthly that relate to eDiscovery related functionality, and he provides basically a table that indicates what the changes are, and also provides his kind of assessment of what it means from an eDiscovery standpoint. So that's eDiscoveryjournal.com. Greg's resource is excellent for kind of keeping up with what's going on in terms of changes to M365 and Purview. Let's get into quickly some real world examples that happen when you don't have a defensible legal hold process in place. I've got 5 cases listed here, a brief blurb about each, and links to them so you can check out the cases. I was going to try to describe them, but we're a little short on time. So I'm going to get right to questions. Obviously, Angie, mistakes can happen no matter how rigid your process is. So what recommendations do you have for our audience on how to defend your approach to discovery?
Yeah, so I mean, even with the best tools, the tightest workflows, mistakes are going to happen. And so what matters is whether you can show that your approach was thoughtful, consistent, and reasonable under the circumstances. To that end, document that process always. Start with a written playbook or something less formal, but just make sure that every decision, from the custodian selection to search terms to hold timing, is logged. Because if something goes sideways, documentation will likely be your first line of defense. Second, anticipate the why. Every step you take should be explainable. If you had to defend it in a 30b-6, could you answer why you did it that way and why it was reasonable under those circumstances? If not, maybe rethink it or write it down. And then finally, be transparent about mistakes. Errors are going to happen and you're going to have to fall on your sword, but just own it early and explain how you addressed it. Because again, courts, they don't expect perfection. That's an unreasonable standard, but they do expect accountability and reasonableness under the circumstances.
Yeah, and I've covered enough cases to see the parties that are forthcoming and transparent about their mistakes tend to either avoid sanctions or lesser sanctions than they would have gotten if they had not done so. So great advice. I'm going to skip the next question I was going to ask you and ask you about the last 2 examples and how they illustrate how significant sanctions can occur by either incomplete legal holds or failing to keep the hold in place long term. So what do you recommend to our audience on how to initiate a comprehensive hold and keep it in place long term?
As far as initiating a comprehensive hold, it's going to come back to process. You want a clear and repeatable process. So don't reinvent the wheel every time. Build a standard operating procedure, an SOP, that outlines when to trigger a hold, who approves it, and how it gets implemented. Second, scope it thoughtfully. Comprehensive doesn't mean casting the widest net, because then you're going to probably be overbroad and under-inclusive in your hold. But it does mean identifying the right custodians, the right data sources, and the right time frame based on the facts. And you might have to iterate on that, right? Like you might learn facts throughout your investigation that justify rescoping that hold down the road. And then finally, use technology to scale. Manual holds break down fast. And so use the tools at your disposal to automate acknowledgements, reminders, tracking, escalations. That consistency is going to be key to long-term defensibility. As far as sustaining that hold over time, I would say, maintain the hold life cycle, because matters evolve and so should your legal hold. It comes back to that iteration. So build in checkpoints to refresh your custodians, revisit the scope, and validate that the hold is still preserving what it should be preserving. Second thing, track departures and transfers. I've touched on this already, but coordinate with HR and IT to make sure that those sort of workforce transitions, you've got a process in place for that. Again, document everything along the way. And then finally, have a hold release process. Like, don't forget the back end. We focus so much on the front end, but the back end is important too. So build a formal release workflow so you're not preserving data forever or releasing it prematurely. And then as kind of part and parcel of this, make sure that you're dealing with those weird data sources. When you scope something, make sure you're capturing those oddities, the cell phones, the smart appliances, the Internet of Things. If any of those are within scope, make sure you have a reasonable process for dealing with them.
Yeah, absolutely. All great points, all great points of advice. These are 5 cases. There's plenty of more that I've covered and plenty more out there that are legal hold failures. It's the biggest area of failure, I think. And the one where a failing, you can recover from a lot of mistakes. It's pretty tough to recover from failure to preserve, and that can really doom your case. So certainly to be noted there. Given the advantage of the best of breed approach, it's important to leverage Purview with a solution that supplements its hold capabilities, especially for E3. So Daniel and/or Brandon, could you walk us through how to leverage a solution like Case Fusion that will complement Purview and address the legal hold gaps that it and other enterprise solutions have? And just tell me when you want me to advance the slides. And
I would probably say for people who want to look this up, the deck is available. I would jump to the next slide for the sake of time and have Brandon quickly giving you the overview here.
Okay.
Yeah. So, just kind of quickly, addressing kind of some of the things that we've talked about from a legal hold standpoint, we approach this in a little bit of a different manner. Instead of starting with the hold notification, we kind of started with the concept of identifying custodians, and not just custodians, but the custodian interactions. And so it was on the last slide, but one of the things that we do that's a little bit differently is we do integrate with the HR system, and there are other tools out there that can take imports from an HR system or sync with AD. But we wanted to take that a step further and be able to give you that historic org chart. What did the organization look like? We can reconstruct that from work history. Acquire a company, ingest the HR system from that company before you sunset it, and sync their AD, and then have this concept of a natural person or an identity that can have many, many technical identities, like a Slack login, a Microsoft login, an email address from old company and an email address from new company, or aliases and various things, right? And then allow that to help legal teams produce gather the right custodians, and then also look at how they interact by looking at things like the Microsoft Access logs and being able to understand who did interact with what data, right? What was outside of that custodian silo that you had on a previous slide, Doug, where you showed the one employee's different repositories that they interacted with, and then all the other things that were happening around them. All of that information is available. It's just not available in the way we would like to be able to interact with it in a system like Purview, and then also be able to do that with other data source types, right? To put together, this interactive, automated data map that helps with those shared data sources, right? It gives you a little bit of evidence to base, or defensibility around doing a targeted collection, and then doing legal hold notifications and including surveys and being able to calendar interviews right from the interface, right? Single pane of glass for all of those different types of in the requests that happen, right? I don't necessarily want to put an HR generalist on legal hold for an employment matter, but I do need to reach out to that person potentially to gather information, right? Like an employment contract, an NDA, all the documents they signed when they joined, something like that, right? As an example. I can also track that through the system, and they'd acknowledge that just like a custodian would through a dedicated portal, right, and manage all of those requests that they have. And then I've got that data stored there. Something came up with a client recently where they said, this would be really helpful for us because we handle so much of this in email, and we don't think about the fact that maybe some of those emails are on an 18-month retention window, right? Because it's just on your general email retention window. And right, if those people who are corresponding aren't on legal hold themselves for some other matter, and maybe they are, but if they're not, I am not storing all those extraneous communications at the same retention category that I might have for data around litigation, which may be, matter end date plus X years, right? And that could be a violation of, security compliance, could be an issue with an insurer. I mean, there's a lot of issues that could come up with not retaining that information correctly. That's just one minor thing, but the bigger part is when I'm collaborating with outside counsel and I have a massive litigation, I'm dealing with a lot of custodians, a lot of requests. I do have that audit trail, and all of that information is stored in one system, and it's at my fingertips.
Sorry, Brandon. Let me just reiterate: the data map is coming from the audit logs from M365. So you have, if you've got 10,000 files in SharePoint, you have the 200 files that your custodians really opened and touched. So that drives down your review cost and your collections dramatically. And I'm just kind of mindful of the time because I'm seeing already a few people saying goodbye. Maybe we should make sure that we,
And so let me pop in here for a moment. Yes, since we are past the top of the hour, a couple of things I'm seeing. We will send out a link to the slide deck as well after this. So any of you who are still on and saying you weren't able to download it, you will get a copy, and you'll also get a link to the full video. So if you have to drop off, we understand. We're going to go a little further on because we're also going to try to address some questions as well. So just wanted to let you all know that. If you have to drop off, you'll get a link to the video so you can check out the end, because the ending is always important to check out. So back to you guys, and let me know when you want me to advance to the next slide.
It's your call, Brandon.
Oh, we can just keep going.
Okay.
I think there's, we can keep.
Oh, all right, and there we go.
Yeah, just you can go ahead and build that out. And this will be in the, like I said, you'll be able to download the resources, download the slides in the resources section. But the big takeaway I think for Case Fusion is that we are looking at the case law, right? We're looking at what's coming, and we're looking at our own backgrounds, client requests, and things like that to put together what we want to be really the operating system for in-house eDiscovery professionals. And our prediction is that eDiscovery professionals will start doing a lot more than just litigation, right? And many of us do that today with all types of routine matters that come up, and legal hold is often, data preservation, notification, request handling, all of that, and identification are all parts of that, those workflows, whether they, relate to a litigation matter directly or not. It could be privacy related investigations, that kind of thing. And so our platform is giving, it's taking away a lot of the minutia of these mundane tasks. It's centralizing that information and giving you access to lots and lots of data at your fingertips that vastly expands the capabilities, internally discovery capabilities of of the source systems like a Microsoft or a Slack or a Box or a Google, to give you truly what I would consider like that operating system, right? It's the ERP system for eDiscovery is the goal, because there's just so many workflows, so many places where mistakes can be made, or we can have some compliance issues, or and again, while perfection's not the goal, technology can help you get a lot closer and to automate that those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to try to tackle a handful of questions here real quick. I'll pose them. You guys can weigh in. I'll weigh in as well. One from Robert Middleton here. Should you have a process to enforce company data retention policies after all legal holds are removed from a custodian? Absolutely. And sometimes that tends to get lost in the shuffle. Any comments, Angie, your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, agreed, absolutely. And I'll just say, like, my yes and to that is automate it if you can. If you have an InfoGov policy that will help you address that, if you can automate your data retention, or like at least flag it, have some sort of automated flag for the people who are in charge of initiating those systems. If you have like a trigger-based one or one that's a little bit more manual, but yes, you should.
All right, I see Daniel's typing an answer to one question. I'll get a. This was a question earlier. How does Purview handle employee turnover and/or changes to their role in an organization? Are there ways to ensure data is held legal, IT, and HR are aware? Do you guys have any knowledge of the answer to that one? We're not exactly Purview experts here, but that's certainly one we could take and try to get some try to find out.
I'm seeing this now. So Purview checks the AD fields for manager and all these things. I'm not sure that this is the best approach. Normally the only thing that you can really base your decisions on is the content of the HR system. And so that's what we added. If you have an AD that is super clean and you have it synced from your HR system into AD, that's a much better option. But the problem is in AD you have the current org chart. You don't have the historic one. So if you want to find out what happened 2 years ago with the patent case that you have in front of you, you might want to know who was on the research team 2 years ago and not who is on that research team now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Quick comment here. I encountered an issue in the new UX with a collection yesterday where the custodian value was not populated. My understanding is this a known issue, or this is a known issue. Until then, the location name field may be used to identify the custodian. Guess what? Not surprising, some new changes, maybe some little, little issues with some of the changes, and obviously they're working through it. So that's certainly one to be on the lookout for. And I'm sure there are others that people are finding as they're moving over to the new UX.
It's fixing the audits basically and fixing some of the reports that we alluded to earlier.
Right. And one last one I'll touch on here. When configuring data sources within the new UX and Purview, how can we ensure that information is collected appropriately without applying a hold to a custodian or group location? In the premium tool, this can be managed by deselecting the hold option in the settings. I want to collect, but not hold. Not sure why you don't want to hold, but any comments on that one?
Well, it's basically the same thing. If you cannot hold in place, you can always just create more or less an export and say, okay, I'm going to hold the data in a location by exporting it. I think right now, I wouldn't be surprised if Microsoft will adjust some of these features in the E3 and the E5 license, or in the premium and the standard license, simply because some of these things don't make sense to even offer them in the standard if you cannot follow to the end and follow through. So right now, my advice would be, think about maybe then creating a preservation by exporting the data, and kind of give up on holding it in place. It's a bit frustrating, but it is what it is.
Hey, well, I mean, this is a discussion we could continue to have. We've obviously gone 9 minutes over, and we could easily go probably another hour if we really were to come down to it. But I'm going to cut it off here and thank our panelists, Daniel, Brandon, and Angie, for your great insights today. I want to thank all of you who are left for attending today's webinar on the ACEDS webinar channel, and for the terrific questions and comments. And since I don't think Mike made it back, I will I will offer his normal closeout and say, check out ACEDS webinar page for upcoming webinars and resources. And as Mike would always say, be kind to one another. And goodbye.
Take care, everyone.